Hello, my name is Abby Ziegler, and for my video project 2, I will be talking about the subject of language and its effects in terms of popular culture and how it had affected my local community. So, where my local community is, I'm going to reference back where my family lives in Phoenix, is a predominantly Hispanic area, and that includes the surrounding school districts as well, but I will be focusing on the school district that I attended and that I have the most background talking about. Something that had happened, I believe last year, was there was a new rule set in place where unless you were an ESOL student, and that meant that you had to be a part of the ESOL classes, you needed to speak English in the classroom. It was not an exception to speak Spanish, French, etc., whatever your native language is. You had to speak English, because if you were speaking anything other than English, it was seen as rude, disrespectful, and something that you could get a form of consequence for. And the only time that you were allowed to speak any other language except for English would be in your language classes, and my school only offered Spanish as the second language class. So if you spoke Arabic, if you spoke Chinese, if you spoke anything other than Spanish or English, and Spanish was only allowed to be spoken in those Spanish classes or ESOL, or if you were off of school grounds during like your lunch break, you would get a corrective action, and those corrective actions could lead up to suspension and even further into expulsion. And that affected my local community especially hard because so many people are native Spanish speakers in my community. I went to a predominantly Hispanic high school, and they ended up shutting down the neighboring middle school because there wasn't enough resources for how many students were unable to have the opportunity to learn English at a proper pace, and were being forced so quickly to the point where the school district in general just decided to tear down the school and send them to other schools. This was something that was truly quite shocking, especially because we live in, the 21st century, where people shouldn't be chastised for speaking their native language, and it shouldn't be seen as disrespectful if it is what you're more comfortable speaking in terms of. I understand that, yes, it is a school system in America and that we should be prioritizing English because English is the main native language of the United States, but it doesn't mean that we should be silencing students who don't have the opportunity to speak in English as of right now, and we aren't providing them with enough tools in order to get there, and that is causing higher dropout rates. It is causing further problems within schools, and not to mention when it comes to special education and special education classrooms, a lot of parents who don't speak English are having a harder time trying to communicate with educators because there's just less help in general for them to be able to communicate with said educators and with their children. So that was how language had majorly affected my local community, because it is something that my local community still struggles with today, and there's constant back and forth about in terms of our school boards and our superintendents and fellow school districts talking about what rules they're setting in place. So that's how language affected my local community.